Welcome back. Today, the Cuomo administration announced a move to ban fracking in the state. It's a move that have opponents of the practice cheering after waiting years here for the governor to announce a decision on the issue. If you remember, back in 2012, Governor Cuomo considered approving a limited fracking program in some of New York's struggling counties near Pennsylvania. Later, the governor announced that instead his administration would launch a study to review the health risks. Well, month after month went by. In fact, year after year went by, and now the findings of that study have been revealed. The administration now says fracking will be prohibited in New York due to unresolved health issues and dubious economic benefits.
I have identified significant public health risks in the current data, and until the public health red flags are answered by valid evidence through longitudinal long-term studies, prospective analysis, patient surveys with large population pools showing that the risk for impact on public health are avoidable or sufficiently low, I cannot support high-volume hydraulic fracturing in the great state of New York.
Now, the Times reports that advocates for fracking, they've argued it could bring jobs to economically depressed areas, but the governor has also faced strong opposition from groups worried about the effects of fracking on the state's watersheds and aquifers, as well as on tourism and the quality of life in small upstate communities. All right, let's bring in a very happy Riverkeeper president and attorney, Paul Gallay. Paul and the Riverkeeper team have worked very long and hard in the last few years here, advocating the position that the governor and the health department seem to absorb today here. Your guys' jobs is to look out for not just the river, but obviously the quality of the water and the drinking water, et cetera. I've seen the governor, and I've talked to some folks in the administration. I think it's safe to say that 2 years ago, all things equal, he would have supported this. 2 years later today, we hear a different decision. You put a lot of that on the health commissioner.
A health commissioner had study after study that pointed to low birth weight for babies in families that were close to these wells, birth defects. You got respiratory illness risks doubling. And these are national peer-reviewed studies from universities like Yale, Colorado School of Public Health, Cornell, SUNY. You've got levels of benzene and formaldehyde in the air around these fracking operations that are thousands of times higher than normal. The data was overwhelming. The right call was made.
Arguments, and I've got a lot of industry stuff that's come my way, including from some lawmakers who represent some of the districts that may have seen some of the hydrofracking, and they say 32 states across the country, including neighboring Pennsylvania, but going as far west as California, you go to Illinois, they do it, and they have seen, as they said, no safety consequences as a result of this. You can do the procedure, they argued, safely. Could we have had our cake and eat it too? Could they have done this in a way with more transparency that you and other groups would have been comfortable with?
You don't see results in these other states that suggest it's safe. You see that it's dangerous. You see that the companies cut corners. You see that penalties are slaps on the wrist. And you see families that get lied to. The reality is the people who say this is safe, let them go live next to these wells while they're being established, and then let them stay there while the wells are being harvested, and then let's hear them tell us how safe it is. What the health commissioner said and what the governor echoed is, I wouldn't want my family living next to one of these wells. Maybe it doesn't seem so bad from 100 miles away, but remember, if this were your family, you'd want the decision to come out just the way it did.
Paul, is there any form of fracking that's safe? And there's different forms of it, whether it be vertical or horizontal. Is there safer practices than others when it comes to this? And I know forever you guys have been looking for complete transparency as to what were the chemicals being used. If they laid everything on the table and they did the practice a certain way, could this have been amenable?
You know, this high volume hydrofracking, where you bring in 4 million gallons of water and blast the rock apart, and you bring up the radiation that's in the rock that's minding its own business until you send all that water down. And then about a third of the water comes back up, and it's got the radiation, and it's got the chemicals, and it's got the benzene, and it gets up into the air. And you just can't make that safe. It's by definition not safe, and that's what the governor and the health commissioner and the environmental commissioner had the courage to say today. They said, we know other states have moved forward on this, and we think that they're going to regret it if they don't already. But when we talked to the other states, says our health commissioner, they didn't involve their health commissioner at the start. And if they had, they might have come to the same intelligent decision New York's come to.
There were some press releases that invoked that old line from the early 70s, that old Daily News headline, Ford to New York dropped dead. It was Cuomo to upstate communities dropped dead. They said this could have been a big economic generator, could have created a lot of jobs here, and let those communities decide for themselves. What about that county rule or local rule, A, and then B, the economic opportunities that this could have provided?
Listen, there are better ways to bring these communities back. If this is the best opportunity for economic development in these communities, I fear for them. Because the other studies you see suggest that the states and the regions that depend on this kind of natural resource extraction, over time they do worse than the other communities. Worse on education, worse on the diversity of their economy, worse on long-term accumulation of wealth and what people have in their bank accounts. This is a short-term fix. Then in the long term, it sours your water, it makes your community less desirable, it interferes with your farming and your tourism. This is a bad bet economically as well as environmentally.
And to that point, we went up to Dimmock in Pennsylvania, and we've seen a fair amount of buyer's remorse up there as to what the impacts long-term are. Finally, were you ever conflicted about this? And I ask it because from an environmental standpoint, the less energy dependent we are in the Middle East, the less that we're doing to increase carbon footprints, et cetera, it's a good thing. This could have been one of those alternative energies, not the ideal one. I know we're not talking solar or wind here, but still, did you go into hydrofracking when your organization first looked at it and said, you know what, this is a lesser of two evils? Was that ever on the table?
This looked like a bad bet to me from the start. You had companies that weren't following the law. You had secrets about what chemicals they were using. You had nowhere to put the wastewater. You had water deficits in some communities where it was happening. You had methane leakage that makes it worse than coal from the standpoint of greenhouse gas. You had people who were having their water soured and their properties ruined. It was a bad bet. This was never going to align for doing this. And the reality is between energy efficiency and solar and wind and other means of getting energy without high carbon, we can do this. Everybody thinks that that's something for the future. We can do energy better today. And we're going to do it without fracking, and we're going to do it without Indian Point, too.
And that a story that you and I will be talking about in the not too distant future. Some major potential headlines on that front coming. But Paul, I thank you for the time here, and I am sure a day that you guys are going to circle on the calendar is a good one for your organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right, everybody. When we come back, we are going to be hearing from New York State Attorney General. I sat down with Eric Schneiderman one-on-one about his push to gain prosecutorial powers, easy for me to say, over cases involving unarmed civilians who were killed by a police officer. We'll bring in our legal panel on that straight ahead.